Welcome to the EarthWorks podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hi everybody, Joel Simmons with the EarthWorks podcast. Today we're going to do part 2 of Learning with Jerry. I had a chance to introduce you guys, at least those of you who didn't know Jerry, to our founding member, Jerry Brunetti. And I will reintroduce you to Jerry again today. But I will say that I got a lot of calls from folks that knew Jerry and listened to the podcast last week and said the same things that they said probably when they heard him live, which was, wow, there's a lot of information there. And there really is. I mean, you can only imagine after spending close to 30 years professional and maybe even 40 years if you talk about years prior to starting EarthWorks that I spent with Jerry, and he was my mentor. I mean, he taught me pretty much everything I know of biological soil management and really how a soil works. And I can honestly say there were times when, my head would hurt after a little bit of time with Jerry because there was just so much knowledge in his head. He was such a learned student and a studied student and so well read. And he was a sponge for information, and he would just constantly be looking for new things and new directions and new ideas to go into. Got a lot of calls this week, too, from folks that never met Jerry and heard of him and heard him talking for the first time. And a lot of the same things, saying, wow, he really was smart. He really had a lot to say. I'm going to have to watch that a couple of times. And that's probably a good idea. That's why we record these podcasts both on YouTube, on audio formats, so that you can re-listen and re-watch because there really is a lot of information there. Again, Jerry and I started the company in 1988. And the pieces that I'm going to talk about and show you today are going to help you understand a little bit more about who he was and really how he came about the formulations that he was so prolific with. He did the core of the EarthWorks formulations. And the one thing I was looking for when I was going through video clips this week was to find his conversations on mineralizations and remineralization. Jerry was very, very big on remineralizing soils and would really press that into our mind and into our formulas. And those of you who know EarthWorks and know us and know me know that we talk a lot about the importance of minerals in our formula, which is why we've gone down the road that we have in terms of formulations and how important it is, and particularly in turf, because what we're doing with turf is growing a cover crop. And think about this, a cover crop is constantly demineralizing the soil. So when those roots reach into a soil, they're looking for nutrients. They're looking for calcium. They're looking for potassium, phosphorus, and iron, and magnesium, and whatever it might be. And they're going to take up that mineral as they see fit. Plants have an intelligence. They know when they're in need of a certain mineral, and they go out of their way to spit out organic acids that they formulate through the process of photosynthesis. They reach their little hands up into the sun, and through that magic of photosynthesis, they turn all of that material into a carbonic acid, and some studies say as much as 80% of that material is spit into the soil for purposes of feeding microorganisms, but also because that acid is strong enough to demineralize a speckle of rock phosphate or calcium carbonate. So when that plant has deemed that it needs calcium or needs phosphorus or whatever mineral it is, it has the ability mechanically to basically pull that mineral out of the soil, and it's all done through this process of photosynthetic activity, spitting down carbonic acids into the soil. The key thing is that those minerals have to be present. So when we started building the company and building these concepts and these formulas, it was imperative in Jerry's mind that we're very involved with lots of different types of minerals. And the diversity of minerals, so that when the plant does need that mineral that it's light on, it can get into that soil and find that mineral. So remineralization was important. That's why we have been using things like rock phosphates and rock dusts, glauconite, which is a potassium silica. We use mineral-dense composts that have come from the bird industry, from chickens that are fed with very high mineral diets, because these birds are fed with this very strong mineral diet. Most of that material is actually sent out through the back end of the bird. Recently, I was at our plant talking to the nutritionist at our chicken farms, and they talk about the need for these very mineral and carbohydrate dense foods for these chickens, because they're trying to raise eggs and they're trying to grow healthy birds. We work and partner with Rose Acres Farms out in Indiana. They generate something to the effect of 1.4 million dozen eggs a day. A lot of chickens, a lot of eggs, and a lot of chicken poop. And in the conversation with this nutritionalist, it was interesting because he said, we put so much food into this bird, but they're so inefficient that most of that food just comes out the back end. I mean, all these minerals that we're spending all this money to build these shells and to make these birds healthy, most of it's going out the back end. And I'm like, wow, this is wonderful, because that's what I'm interested in. I want that material, and it's mineral rich. And what I'm going to share with you today is clips of Jerry talking about remineralizing the soil. He talks a lot about it. The first part of this clip that we're going to talk about, he does talk a little bit about the relationships with animals, as he did last week. He talks about Mulder's wheel, which is the limiting factors that can be created if these minerals that we talk about are not there in sufficient amounts. And these are all very important. We want to make sure that we have really adequate amount of minerals in the soil. He talks about mineral antagonism. If there is too much iron, for example, in a turf plot or on a soil test that we review for a turf client, we can be pretty assured that other trace elements like manganese, copper, and zinc will probably not be very available because of the antagonism that iron can cause. And it's very prevalent in the turf industry because we tend to use so much iron. And it's one reason why we're very cautious to control the use of iron, because it will antagonize the potential availability of other minerals that are equally, if not sometimes even more important for the uptake of the plant and for the overall health of the plant. He talks about cell functioning. Of course, he's always talking about animals, so please bear with the conversation when he's comparing it. But think again of that full cycle. The cow that he might be talking about is feeding off of the grass that he's been eating in the field. If that grass isn't getting adequate nutrient, the cow's not getting adequate nutrient. We might, in the turf industry, stop at that turf level. It might not go to cows. You probably don't have cows or sheep grazing on your golf courses or your sports fields. But the health of that plant is equally important. And it's really, if we can get healthy plants, and the cows or the sheep or whoever it might be are eating that grass, it's going to be a healthier animal the full cycle. We stop halfway through, but we still need healthy mineral-rich soil so that the plants can get all the minerals that they can get. Remember, plants don't take up amino acids. They take up all the building blocks of amino acids. That's why these minerals are so important. And many of the minerals that we do talk about are not just a linear mineral like a phosphorus or a calcium, but they're loaded with trace elements, so that we're pulling in an awful lot of minerals in that process as well. So that's really the process that he talks about. So again, the first part that we have here is really Jerry talking about the basic elements. I'm going to pause at some point, come back and get into some more specifics with him, but enjoy this piece of his conversation. This was all recorded in June of 2013, again by a group called Landcare in Australia. I believe Jerry first went down to Australia at the request of a dear friend of ours, a gentleman by the name of Graham Seat, who brought him into Australia for the first time probably in the early 2000s, but he spent a lot of time speaking in Australia, and this clip from today's podcast is from a talk that he gave that was essentially entitled 13 Steps to Optimum Livestock Production. But again, you can see there's an awful lot of soil conversation in this clip that we're going to share with you today. So again, Jerry Brunetti, please enjoy.
So Albrecht was a guy that was looking at soils, but Albrecht, when he looked at soils, he said, let's look at soils from the perspective of following it all the way through the system. Not just whether you can get a better yield of maize or a better yield of soybeans, but whether or not you're getting the quality that you're really after, because if you're after producing livestock and healthy human societies, you need nutrient density. They didn't really call it nutrient density back then, but that's what they were talking about. So they followed the experiments from the soil, through the forages, through the animals, and found out whether or not nutrient density was really relevant. Who cares whether or not you have more tryptophan or more nitrogen in the forage? Does it matter? And this is what Albrecht was doing, in the early part of the 20th century. So he said, well, where are the healthiest soils? Where are the best soils in the world? And of course, this was the high plains and the Great Plains that produced maybe the second largest biomass after the dinosaurs. 70 million head of these cattle, called bison, lived out there. The current stock size of the U.S. cattle herd on the range right now is 46 million head. 70 million head without GMOs, without tillage, without herbicide, without fertilizer, without a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, the size of the state of Massachusetts, which is 10,500 square miles of dead zone, the estuaries, from all the runoff, the pollution, by basically turning that system into a feedlot system. All right? The point is that he ended up going there, and how did he find out where the healthy soils are, and correlated it with this large biomass of ruminants that moved nutrition up and down through the phasing of grass growing, being consumed, dung and urine, rest, the holistic management system that we now are relearning. He went to the World War I draft records, found out where the highest rejection rates and the highest acceptance rates were. World War I. So the United States went to World War I in about 1917-18. And so he said, okay, the highest rejection rates were in the Ozarks, which was northern Arkansas, southern Missouri, and Appalachia, Kentucky, eastern Tennessee. Rocky, thin soils. Because back in those days, people didn't buy, foods from centralized supermarkets. They ate fairly regionally because we didn't have centralized food systems back then. People weren't buying a lot of their produce from California, United States, back in 1917. And where were the highest acceptance rates were in the apatite plain soils. That's what we call apatite soils. These are calcium phosphate soils. Calcium phosphate soils. New Zealand, Australia, and the United States did a lot of work finding out where the healthiest soils were, because you have old soils that are deficient in some of these minerals. New Zealand has young soils that are deficient, and we have pockets of these soils. And that's what Albrecht said. Where are the healthiest soils? Where's the biggest biomass? And more importantly, through the draft records, how did you find out whether or not you were eligible for the draft? You didn't get blood tests and CAT scans. You looked at someone's teeth and you looked at their feet, and if they had rotten teeth and flat feet, they weren't going to war. That's how you bought a mule or a horse back in those days. Still do. The Amish still buy them that way, with a little bit of underhanded stuff going on once in a while. But the point is, rotten teeth, flat feet, you were staying home. And they found out that the people that had the highest acceptance rates were in places like Iowa and Illinois and Nebraska. Apatite soils where the buffalo roamed. All right, so we just did the opposite with our kids, our young men at that time, that we did with the culling practices with livestock. We sent the brightest, the strongest, the healthiest people to go off to be cannon fodder, right? And we kept the toothless, flat-feeted wonders at home to breed, right? Only in those areas, though, not all over the place. So minerals are a big, big part of this whole thing. Albrecht was a minerals guy, and I cut my teeth on the Albrecht model. It's not everything, but it's a foundational thing. So mineral excesses make mineral deficiencies, and mineral deficiencies make mineral deficiencies. That's why I look at the water. And what we see here is 25 elements in bold are considered necessary for cattle and sheep. Total of 78 elements that they've so far recognized. Maybe we need all of them. But 78 elements are recognized for cell function, whether you're a bovine cell, a sheep cell, or a human cell. And these are the elements that are missing in a lot of cases. These are the limiting factors. So you hear these stories. What are your yield limiting factors? What are your health limiting factors? Sometimes it comes down to sometimes a single element. So what this is mineral levels. This is out of England. Mineral levels and deficiencies in temporary pastures. So you can see that we've got all the macros and micros that we oftentimes test for. So if we have these kinds of deficiencies, this percentage of our pastures that are deficient in these critical elements, and we need all 78 or 92, depending on whose theory you want to subscribe to, these are limiting factors. So you got to make up the difference somehow. So you either make it up through your soil amendments, you make it up through foliar sprays, you put it out through salt licks, whatever you got to put out there, but you got to have them. You can't get something for nothing. The other thing is in mineral antagonism theory, you can see that we've got families. So this is the halogen family, all right? So what's in the halogen family? Fluoride, chloride, bromine, iodine. Iodine's the big one. This is a human health talk, but I won't go into it. But iodine is a very, very limiting trace element, and it's also knocked out by fluoride and chlorine. And that's oftentimes found in potable water systems, right? Over here you can see potassium and sodium. It's one of the reasons why udder edema, animals that blow up with a lot of bagged caked udders. They don't necessarily have a sodium excess, they have a potassium deficiency. Or they might have a sodium excess, because those two elements are, partners. Chromium and molybdenum, zinc and cadmium. Here's one that's interesting to me: zinc, cadmium, and mercury. Well, I don't want mercury and I don't want cadmium. I would like zinc. Question has, if you have a zinc deficiency, your susceptibility to uptakes of cadmium, because they're in the same family, goes up. Your susceptibility to uptake of mercury, because they're in the same family, goes up. So not only are you subjecting yourself to toxic elements by being exposed to them, you exacerbate the problem by having deficiencies of the healthy elements which antagonize them. That makes sense? So in the soils, this is why you see these ranges. And this is one of the reasons why, if you look on things like the Albrecht model or most of the soil tests that anybody's using anymore, you'll see that this range of availability is right here in this pH of a mid-6s. That's where you get the maximum availability of the micros and the macros, particularly on crop and horticultural fields. If you have a permanent polyculture on there, however, which if you're grazing, that's what you want, that's what you have, this gets ameliorated because you got more biology. And biology makes minerals more available in any pH range, So if I have a perennial system out there, I'm producing acids out of the root system all the time. This shows you a mineral wheel here. And what do I see? I see all of these elements. There's antagonisms. And you can see the number of antagonisms just with iron, 13, copper, 11, manganese, 10, cadmium, 6, and so on and so on. Mulder's wheel, they call this. And what we're saying here is that excesses create deficiencies, deficiencies create excesses. If you have a deficiency of an element, another element that you don't really want there goes up in its availability, and vice versa. These are minerals that are synergistic, so they work together as partners. So if you want an availability of minerals to be more active, they need partners. So calcium needs phosphorus, it needs magnesium, it needs strontium, it needs boron, it needs zinc. If you want to build strong teeth and bones, good frame, you need the whole family that work in these concerted ratios that make everything come out so much stronger. And this is not difficult to do, but most people, believe it or not, this day and age, do not test their soils thoroughly, and they do not test their forages thoroughly. They don't do any animal testing, like hair analysis. Humans should be doing more of that, but there's a whole lot here that's just guessed upon, assumed upon, because it's all about production agriculture. It's about energy and protein, and not even necessarily quality energy or quality protein. And then the vitamins play a role in here. Vitamins play a huge role because they act as catalysts. What are catalysts? Catalysts are things that speed up biochemical reactions without actually being used up. enzymes are the biggest catalyst that we can have. And enzymes run everything. You can't see, your heart doesn't beat, your digestion doesn't occur, your muscles don't contract, you can't breathe. None of these metabolic processes, cow, human, pig, whatever you might be, work without enzyme systems. And every enzyme system, without exception, depends on some kind of mineral family. If you have a deficiency of those minerals, you have a deficiency of those enzymes, which means your immune system can take a hit, your hormonal system can take a hit. You're trying to get animals bred back, they depend on what? A nice synchronicity of hormones at the right time. If those hormones are not operating correctly, here we are talking about humans, you know, at my age, men should be thinking about not just testosterone, but estrogen. Women that are my age should be thinking about not just estrogen, but testosterone and progesterone. You know, you're only as young as your hormones, but hormones are dependent upon the dance of all of these cofactors.
So you can see Jerry's passion in when he's talking about this whole concept of remineralization. And like I said prior to that clip, we've always been very involved in diversity. I mean, one of the things that Jerry insisted upon in everything that we did is that we create diversity. Mineral diversity, of course, is one of the most important things. So we added minerals to our granular formulas. We found mineral-dense raw materials to put into our liquid formulas, everything designed to make sure that you're constantly getting minerals and remineralizing these cover crop soils that are constantly demineralizing soils. In this next clip, Jerry's going to talk about some of the very specific minerals, and particularly calcium. And it was interesting listening to this, and I think I've said this a couple of times in these two podcasts, but it's been emotionally draining watching him again. And of course, it's proven to me that I have been a talking piece for Jerry's words. I listened to this next piece when he starts talking about calcium, and I realized, yeah, I've been saying those same things for probably 25 years myself. If any of you that have been with us for our academies will hear him when he talks about calcium and its importance in the soil and how it's one of the biggest minerals in the soil. But he's going to spend some time talking now about specific minerals. He's going to talk about calcium and phosphorus and magnesium. He talks about phosphorus as the energy molecule and the importance of ATP in the system. And again, all of these things he talks about are part of the physiological makeup of any plant. It could be a landscape plant. It could be a grass plant. Bermuda, bent, poa, doesn't matter what the plant material is. All plants, all animals, all people need all of these elements in pretty much the same amount. So it's very similar to you and me is what we're talking about with the plant. And he does talk about trace elements. He talks about vitamins, and I remember Jerry talking about vitamins and the importance of vitamins. And as vitamins go, so do go enzymes, and how important it was. And I remember talking to my dear friend Corey Haney, who just recently retired from the industry from Washington Golf, and he would always kind of chuckle about all of these concepts, remineralization. And I said, well, the next big thing you're going to see is people coming into your office talking about vitamins and their importance. And you'll see Jerry talk about vitamins. And interestingly enough, probably within a week and a half of that conversation with Corey, he called me up laughing because somebody came into his office trying to sell him a product on vitamins. And it sounds very esoteric. It sounds very, absurd and like snake oil. But these are all building blocks. Vitamins, trace elements, the macro elements, the micro elements. Without them, we don't build amino acids in the plant. We don't build peptides. We can't build the proteins that make up chlorophyll. And that's really what it's all about, is making sure there's enough diversity of mineral in the soil so that we can have that plant build these building blocks that are so essential in building proteins like chlorophyll. And it's also essential that we have biological diversity, because it's biology that also helps us to break down these minerals in the soil. So let you listen to Jerry once again. He's going to talk a little bit more about some of the specific minerals. Toward the end of this clip, he talks about one of my favorite words, which is geophagy. Geophagy is that phenomenon occurs when an animal knows that it needs a mineral. You probably have seen this with your dogs or your cats. They'll go out and eat grass or other more disgusting things because their body is deficient of a mineral, or there are some issues with the animal that it's looking for something that it's not getting in its diet. That's what geophagy is, and he talks a little bit about that. And again, I realize that there's some slides in his set that I stole and talked about this, but geophagy was always one of those interesting subtopics that kind of help explain the importance of mineralization in this process. So once again, Mr. Jerry Brunetti.
So calcium is the king of nutrients, not because it's more important than anything else, but because we use it more by weight and volume. Animals use it more by weight and volume. Again, cow or person. And a lot of your soils here are calcium deficient, and a lot of our soils have calcium excesses, and that means we have, ironically enough, a deficiency in the plant. Why would that be? We have a deficiency in the plant because in order to get the calcium out of the soil up into the plant, we need to have the other cofactors there, like boron. You have a boron deficiency and a real high calcium soil, you usually see a deficiency of calcium in the tissue. So what good is all that calcium in the soil? What good is it putting lime on the soil? I was talking to some people in Western Australia a handful of years ago. In the wheat belt, they spray like crazy for various pests over there, insects over there. And they were advised by their conventional advisors not to apply boron because it's toxic. All trace elements are toxic. Every single one of them. Every single one of them. All food is toxic, as well as being nutritious. It's a matter of having the right combinations, right? But every trace element, that's why they call it trace, is toxic when it gets above trace. Boron is a toxic element when it gets above trace and if it's not associated with adequate amounts of calcium. Adequate amounts of calcium applied on those wheat fields over there by north of Perth, boron toxicity completely disappears in a New York minute. So phosphorus is really important. I don't care if you're growing crops, if you're growing avocados, or if you're growing cattle. Phosphorus is part of the apatite mineral stuff that I talked about that Albrecht pointed out. Calcium, phosphate make apatite soils. They're the richest soils, all right? Why is phosphorus so critical? Is because phosphorus is the core element of the energy currency of all life, plants and animals. That energy currency is called what? ATP. Adenosine triphosphate. Whether you're a tomato plant, or a Holstein cow, or President Obama, or whoever else you want to fill in there, you need ATP in order to have a healthy combustion of energy. And phosphorus then needs to be 10 minutes. Holy smokes, I think you're cheating. Magnesium is part of that. It's a carrier for phosphorus in plants. It's a synergist for 300 enzymes, magnesium. 300. Potassium. At least 8 enzyme systems are associated with it. In Pennsylvania, we have potassium excesses. Around here, you might have potassium deficiencies. If you have potassium excesses, you have major problems with getting high-quality protein in the forages and enough energy in the forages. We call sulfur the medical mineral. Look at all these compounds that sulfur makes. Heparin, biotin, lipoic acid, glutathione. These are immune factors, detoxifying factors. I call sulfur the detox element in soils and in animals and people. If you're going to put trace minerals down, you got to have enough of the major elements there. Like I said, don't throw boron on a calcium deficient soil. Get your lime on it first. 1949 research, before they came out with all these fungicides, showed that trace elements were directly or indirectly associated with all these plant diseases. And if you have plant diseases, that means you have lots of funny protein. You can't make quality protein with a lot of deficiencies of trace elements. These are some of the books on minerals for livestock. There's more. A lot of this research is old. Some of it's 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s. It's ongoing because we're finding out that the trace minerals and the macro elements drive plant medicine. If you want to have resistance to diseases and insects and plants, 1936, University of Vermont said, if you have a lot of leafhopper, is that the word they use over here for leafhopper, or you call it something else? Really loves hot weather when plants are stressed. Really devastates lucerne. 1936, University of Vermont said, if you have a lot of leafhopper pressure, you have a boron deficiency, not a Saigon deficiency, insecticide deficiency. It was boron. Get the boron levels up, you get more pectins in the lucerne. Pectins protect the plant from what? Chewing and diseases. Pectins. So this is some of the research Albrecht did in isolation, mixing different minerals, isolating them, harvesting, feeding them into rabbits, seeing what the weight gain was. And what did they find out? Yes, quality does translate into production. Zinc, 200 enzyme systems. Works with vitamin A to create what? Immunity. This is 1940s research, 50s research showing that zinc creates more vitamin C and beta-carotene. Beta-carotene is a precursor to vitamin A. However, there's 600 different carotenes now they've identified. In the tomato, the red one is called lycopene. In collard greens and spinach, it's called lutein, the yellow one. And then there's copper to make elasticity with the nervous system, the wiring of the body. It's a powerful antioxidant. Works with vitamin C to make it last longer for the immune system. It works with creating hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the oxygen-carrying protein in the blood that consists of copper, cobalt, and iron. Manganese. You see a lot of bull calves instead of heifer calves? You got a manganese deficiency, maybe. Good chance you do. Or it could be genetics. But manganese has been studied for a long, long time, going all the way back to the 50s on reproduction in cattle. This is 1953 research. Back in University of Wisconsin, they found out that by looking at the manganese levels in fodder, that they could actually triple the weight of the ovaries of the animal merely by getting the fodder levels up with high enough manganese. That's reproductive performance. Vitamin E goes up when manganese is sprayed on foliage. This is 1950s research. That's how far we've been looking at this stuff. Vitamin E is another what? Antioxidant. It's a vitamin partner. Iron, I never worry about. I don't think you should either. If you have iron deficiencies in the foliage, you have other element deficiencies probably, or you have cold soils or flooded soils. Iron is the second most abundant element in the Earth's crust after silica. So once in a while we'll foliar spray iron because other things in the soil aren't right and we just need to get a jump on our chlorophyll. If you want to make photosynthesis efficient, what do we need? Chlorophyll. What makes chlorophyll? The green pigment in the plant. Magnesium, iron, sulfur, zinc. These are elements that make photosynthesis possible. Molybdenum. This is a trace mineral that is needed for what? Nitrogen fixation with legumes like lucerne or clovers. And in animals, it's a nitrogen detoxifier. Helps you detox nitrates. And there's boron I talked about. All the hormones depend on boron. Testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. You have a deficiency of boron, human or cow, you're going to have hormone imbalances. This is just animals. I'm not even talking about the plants. Iodine. That's why kelp is so popular in the United States. I think it's because the iodine levels are so extraordinary, along with the rest of the spectrum of the ocean in there. But iodine works with this gland called the thyroid gland and vitamin A so that the hormones, like the adrenal glands and the ovaries and the testes, can be harmonized and synchronized. Cobalt, vitamin B12. You don't have a ruminant unless you have vitamin B12, and you can't make vitamin B12 unless you have cobalt. By the way, most of that research that I dug up came out of Australia in the early part of the 21st century. That's Australian stuff because you have big cobalt deficiencies here. Selenium, considered to be a deadly toxic element until 1959. Now we know that it works in tandem with good quality protein. Again, what are we talking about? Amino acids. So what are we talking about? Methionine, sulfur-bearing amino acid, glycine, and glutamine. You take those three amino acids, hook it up with selenium, you make an enzyme. What's the enzyme called? Glutathione peroxidase. Forget about that word. You're never going to remember it anyway. But the importance of it is it drives white cell activity, strong white cell activity, glutathione peroxidase, selenium, and quality protein. Chromium. energy metabolism. A lot of diabetics use this almost as a substitute for insulin, along with vanadium. I don't even have that up here, I don't think. But chromium is all about converting the energy from whatever source into whatever your objective is, whether it's milk production or growth on the frame. You need chromium. Nobody looks at this stuff. They just assume that it's all about the basics. Here's vanadium. Vanadium. Now, we don't put vanadium in anything, nor do we put nickel in anything, because you can find it in kelp, you can find it in naturally occurring minerals like these salt licks or these mineral licks that we use over there. We have things called native lick, and we have dynamine, things like this that are naturally occurring deposits. Silica is another one. This is the mineral premix for Andalay farms back in 1940. This is what they were curing, guess what? Bang's disease, also called brucellosis, and Dr. Ira Allison called it undulant fever in humans. 322 patients cured with nutrition with no relapses in 3.5 years. Never done before. There's their premix in 1940. Look how complex it is. They were already discovering minerals in the 1920s and went right to it. Watch the animals eat this stuff. Write it down because it changes. It's a moving target. Write what wild plants they eat, what hedgerow plants they eat, what fodder trees they eat, because I'm telling you, they're teaching you what's going on nutritionally in their systems because it's a moving target. As the weather changes, their preference for a mineral or a plant changes, and it has a lot to do with the outcome of the animal's phenotype. And so they've been studying it. What are they looking for? What are they hungry for? These are ungulates, wild animals that they've been studying in North America. And they found out where these animals were, or these licks, these natural licks were occurring, were in predominantly places that had cities or towns, I should say, with the word lick in them, because the colonists that came over from Europe wanted to eat, so they went where the game was, and they found out where the game was is where the mineral licks were. So they built communities around these mineral licks because it was easy to hunt these animals there. And wild animals do this all the time. You can see the macaw on the left over there. He's got a big handful of mud. That's a clay of a specific type on a tributary of the Amazon that those birds specifically go after at certain times of the year when the fruit comes into ripening, and the seeds in that fruit happen to be toxic. Anybody ever see their animals eat dirt? Yeah, everybody's seen animals eat dirt. And there's a reason why animals eat dirt. They're either mineral deficient, or they got a toxin, like a mold poison, or they have acidosis from too much grain, or they have funny protein ammonia building up. So basically, Weston Price was a guy that put together mineral nutrition, a dentist from Cleveland that traveled all around the world for 10 years at the isolated cultures all around the world, including Australia, Africa, Central and South America, Polynesia, and he found 14 cultures that ended up being the healthiest people on the face of the earth. No cancer, virtually no tooth decay, no arthritis, no birth defects or morbidity with children. And what he found out was even though the diets from blubber from the Eskimos is radically different than the Maasai who were drinking blood and milk, what he found was consistency. 5 times more minerals, 10 times more fat-soluble vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K, which work with the minerals. That gave him these picture-perfect health profiles. The same is true with your livestock. And you have to get the minerals as much as you possibly can from nature because they're too doggone expensive to buy them all. If you're going to constantly apply minerals to domesticated crops, you're going to end up spending money.
Hopefully that makes sense. Again, remineralization is a big part of our life, and Jerry, as you could see, talked a lot about it, not only for his crop clients, but certainly for his animal clients, because it is a full cycle. And at one of these Jerry talks, I will share with you his passion for human health, because as he fought cancer, he started really studying the impact of minerals and all these things on human health. And he did a series of talks called Food is Medicine. And it really, again, started with the soil piece of the equation. And he talks about the full cycle. And he was able to prolong and help really make people more comfortable and healthier by just changing diets. And there's an awful lot of talk about that in today's public conversation about good food and how diet can affect our overall health. And clearly it's true. And Jerry understood that, but he took it to a very micro level and really understood it and could qualify and quantify it even by looking at soil tests. Like I've said before, we're going to continue the Learning with Jerry series as I find more clips, and we'll share that with you. There is so much that we can all learn from Jerry. Like I said, I'm probably his biggest student, and still learning, interestingly enough, as I watch these tapes. Not only is the emotion there, but I'm learning things because there's so much that he was sharing with us that was really valuable. Hopefully you can share these podcasts with other folks of interest in our industry and outside of our industry, because there's a lot of information that we can real glean from Jerry's things. So once again, thank you for joining me on the EarthWorks podcast, and we'll be back next week with another version of the EarthWorks podcast. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to this version of the EarthWorks podcast. Today's video clips were provided to us by Landcare Australia, recorded on June 19th, 2013, from a talk Jerry entitled 13 Steps to Optimal Livestock Production.